Hi everyone, Jessica here from Paper Ink Stamp and welcome back to my channel. So in today's video we're going to be taking a look at die cutting essentials, and this is issue 79 and this set is called Just a Note. So as always, let's take a little look in the magazine itself. So within this die set, we do have a really big typewriter die. It's so beautiful, and the magazine shows you lots of different ways that you can use that die, different ways of colouring. So you can use patterned paper, you can use plain paper, sort of colour it, ink blend it, lots of different kinds of options. And it also has some great examples of masculine makes as well. So this is going to be perfect for whatever kind of projects you want to create. So let's take a look at what comes included in next month's issue. We have got a die set by Card Making Magic, and this is called Peony Panel Die Set. So really looking forward to seeing what we can create with that set. But for now, let's get into creating our card for today's video. I'm quickly just going to show you this typewriter and literally just how big this is. It also comes with a torn paper die as well, so you can make it look like you have a piece of paper coming out of your typewriter and you can stamp a sentiment on there. I wanted to create some real interest on my card, and I'm going to be using embossing powder to do that. So this is going to be quite featured heavily on today's card. The set of 6, these are by Stamps by Chloe. This come in a set. I've had these for a while, but I haven't really used them, to be honest with you. And then I've got this red from Nuvo as well. I'm also bringing in some other products. So I've got a stamp set by Stampin' Up. I'm just going to be using a sentiment from that. I've got a Tonic Studio stencil for my background, and then I've got a Hanky Dory circle torn edge nesting die as well for just an extra kind of layer. But the first thing I want to work on is my background, because I want to make sure this is dry and ready when we come to assemble our card. So I've got a piece of 300 GSM cardstock here from Hunky Dory. I'm going to be using this for my background. I'm going to take this Tonics Studio stencil here, and this is called a Full Bloom. So I'm going to be taping this onto my piece of cardstock. I'm going to be using some of the Distress texture paste through my stencil. So I've just brought in my sort of white messy mat. So this has actually come off of my Tim Holtz glass mat, and this is just going to make the cleanup process a lot easier. So I've turned my stencil over and I'm taping my paper to the stencil just to keep this in place, because I have cut this to the size that I want. So I'm going to have a nice border on today's card, so I want to make sure that I go sort of edge to edge with this. So as I said, I'm using my Tim Holtz Distress texture paste, and I'm just going to apply this through the stencil. So we've done this a few times before. I'm just using one of my Nuvo spatulas, and I'm just kind of picking up any excess on top before I kind of go back into the pot. I don't want to have sort of too much left over, but because I'm not applying any product to this, it's not going to get contaminated. Any extra product that I do have, I can just pop back into the jar. And I'm also going to be using then one of my other embossing powders. So this is the Paper Mania, this is a holographic. Again, I've used this one before. It's kind of a clear, just with lots of glitter in it, and I'm actually going to be sprinkling that over the top of this Distress texture paste, and it's going to give us such a beautiful shine. You could use a product that's already kind of white with some glitter in it, so something like the Nuvo Moonstone paste, you could use something like that, but I actually just really love the effect this has with that embossing powder. So I've removed my stencil, I've popped that to one side, and now I'm going to pour over my embossing powder. So you can see I'm just kind of going to go half and half, and then I can rotate my card. But once I've tipped this on to my texture paste, it's going to stick beautifully, and I'm just sort of tapping off any major excess. I don't want to tap it too much where then all of the glitter kind of falls off, but again, because we've just applied this texture paste, it does stick to this really, really well. And you can't necessarily see it here, maybe you can, just all of that shine, but the sort of finished result is just so beautiful. And I've poured this over a piece of scrap cardstock, and I can just go ahead and funnel that straight back in, so we've got absolutely no wastage of our embossing powder. So now I'm going to come in and set this with my heat gun. So I wouldn't normally do this if it was just the texture paste, but of course, because we put that embossing powder, it needs to melt and it needs to stick. But it created something really interesting. Some of the areas, it didn't do it all over, but some of the areas kind of bubbled up, and it kind of gave it this more kind of 3D look. It didn't kind of distort it in any way, but it was just so beautiful because some of it just bubbled and raised really lovely, and yeah, it just created the most beautiful background. So I'm hoping that you are able to see all of this shimmer here. I love this sort of tone on tone. I think it creates such great backgrounds. The next thing I'm going to do is some heat embossing and create our die cuts. So there's two ways that you can do this. I've done it both ways. This is my preference. So what I want to do is heat emboss my typewriter die cut. So what you could do is die cut it first from some white cardstock, and then you could heat emboss on top of that, which worked just as well. The only trouble I had with it is it was quite difficult to kind of hold it, not knock off any of the embossing powder. So I found it easier to heat emboss my cardstock, heat set it, then die cut, because it just gave a more even kind of finish to the heat embossing, and like I said, it was a lot less fiddly and a lot less messy. So all I did was took again some white cardstock, used my Simon Says Stamp clear embossing pad, and I just rubbed my embossing pad directly onto the cardstock. So you can see exactly where this embossing powder has stuck. It's stuck really well. So the colour I've used, I think this was the cherry soda colour, because it gives us a really beautiful kind of hot pink colour in the end. And you've seen I've just poured over that embossing powder, I'm heat setting it, and you can see it change in here, and it just goes really glossy and beautiful. But I really wanted to kind of elevate this. I wanted it to be a bit of a deeper colour, so I allowed this to dry, just to cool down, because if it is still hot, you know, if you touch it you will sort of get a fingerprint in it. So I let it just sit and cool down, and then I added some more of that embossing ink on top, and you can see I'm just pouring more of this embossing powder over the top of our first layer. So I did show you this in a previous video where we looked at embossing powders and how you can use them sort of different ways. This is then just layering up that embossing powder. So what you're seeing here, this is 3 layers. So this is my 3rd layer. It really intensifies the colour, and you can just see it gives you that smooth, ultra sort of glossy look. It does make it a little bit slightly transparent. I don't know if that's the cardstock I used or generally the embossing powder, but you don't really notice it. But I just thought it was so beautiful, and like I said, it just makes it so much easier. So I'm also going to be doing this, I'm die cutting the tiny heart die from this set as well. So this I'm using the Nouveau embossing powder, and this is called Sports Car Red, I believe it is. But you can see all of my die cuts here, so you can see our sort of almost hot pink typewriter now. I think this has come out so beautifully. We've got our white piece of cardstock which we're going to be doing some ink blending on. I've got my red love heart, and also then I've die cut all of those floral dies as well, again for some white cardstock. We're going to be doing a little bit of heat embossing on that as well. But now I want to add a little bit of colour to my sort of a sheet of paper that's going to be coming out of my typewriter. So again, I die cut this from white cardstock, and I'm going to stamp a sentiment, which again comes from the Stampin' Up set. So I did use the antique linen just with one of my finger daubers, just to kind of give this sort of more of a papery look. But I picked this colour because I thought it was lovely, just a little bit warmer, and will stand out nicely from our white background. So now I want to stamp my sentiment, so I'm bringing out my Mini Misty, which, probably going to say this in every video, I use it, I'm still absolutely loving. But I want to stamp my sentiment onto my piece of paper. I want to make sure I get it nice and lined up. So I'm going to pop it into the typewriter, figure out where I want it to go, and I'm going to put both of these into my Mini Misty and hold it down. It's got a really strong magnet in here, so it's just going to sit exactly where I want it to be. The stamps that I'm using by Stampin' Up, this is Forever Fern, and I just thought this sentiment was perfect, and it was a beautiful kind of script as well, and it says, "To a friend that makes me smile." I'm going to stamp this up with some Memento black ink. So I recently ordered a refill for this pad. I was going to do it on a film for you guys, just to kind of show you the difference and why it's important to refill your ink pads, but when it turned up I got so excited that I just didn't do that. But God, it's made the biggest difference. I only had to stamp this once, and it was so juicy I actually ended up smearing it just a tiny bit. But yeah, if you're finding that you're having to stamp multiple times with your ink pads, maybe think back to when you purchased it, how long you've had it, and think about getting a kind of a refill for it. So yeah, it makes all the difference. But you can see that I've just used some of my Lawn Fawn liquid glue just to glue our paper down. So I popped just small dabs of this glue kind of on the back and the front of this, just to hold that in place. And then I'm just going to attach this small love heart, again, that we heat embossed. It's got such a beautiful shine to it. We're going to add that to our piece of paper. And I really love how this is coming together. This die set I just think is absolutely perfect. So the next thing I'm going to do is show you how, again, you can heat emboss small little dies like this. So you've got different sort of floral images here, and I'm going to show you a couple of different ways to do it. So I didn't want to cut any of this footage out, so I have sped it up. In the next sort of a couple of minutes you're going to see it sped up, but what I did is took my tweezers, so I had something to hold on to. I then pressed my die cut into my Simon Says Stamp sticky ink, make sure I got a good coverage, and then poured my embossing powder. So for my green, so we've got this leaf here, and then all of the stems of our flowers I use. This is Lime Zig, and I'm again doing multiple layers with this. So I heat set the first layer because they are quite pastel. I wanted them to be a little bit more vibrant. Once it had dried, I pressed it back into my ink pad and just applied another layer. But what I found with these little florals, I don't know if it's because the die cut generally was smaller, but what I did find is it gave it kind of a glazed look, I guess, which it would because it's embossing powder, but it kind of gave it almost like a crystally kind of look. It just created something so beautiful. So I only really did 2 layers with each of these. Some of the flower heads, I think I did do 3, but the majority I only did 2. But so with these smaller stem pieces, I put it into my tweezers. I held onto the head portion. I just then dipped into the ink pad the actual stem itself, and then I just used the embossing powder that I had already down on this piece of cardstock here. Just kind of dipped it into it, and then heat set that, and again just repeated the process. So it was really easy to do. It didn't take very long at all. My heat gun was already kind of up to temperature, even though I was turning it on and off. It was already up to temperature, so it did kind of go quite quickly. But what I did find more so when I was doing the heads of the flowers is that because that embossing powder was still quite hot, is I didn't need to re-ink it using the ink pad. I could literally just dip it straight back into that embossing powder and it already kind of stuck to it. So now I've done all of my green pieces, I'm going to go in and do my flower heads. So I'm just holding on to the stems of these flowers now. You've seen that I just popped it into my ink pad again, and I actually just dipped this directly into that embossing powder. So I didn't really knock any of this off, and well, that one went completely flying off. It came out of my tweezers, but it kind of built up really beautifully, and it became a little bit more 3D, like I said, because I didn't knock any of that embossing powder off. So this is a really great way if you want to do a little bit of embossing on much smaller images. Of course you could colour these in any way you want to, but something a little bit different. I thought these just came out so beautifully. But you can see I'm just heat drying and then I'm just dunking it back into that embossing powder, and I do think they came out really, really vibrant. They remind me almost of like sweets, where you have that kind of opaque crystalness to it. I just think this worked really well, and I think this is something, you know, that I might look at doing in the future. These are the only real kind of coloured embossing powders that I have. Whether I look at getting sort of any more, I don't know, but you know, this is sort of it came as a 6-pack, so it was a really great kind of introduction into these sort of colours. So I believe this is the last piece that I'm going to be doing. So again, you could do this in the green, you could use this as a bit of foliage. I just did this in, I think this was the strawberry soda colour, I believe. Or this might be the cherry soda, I'm not 100% sure now, but it's sort of this light pink colour. So again, you could use it as foliage, but again, I just wanted to use all of the colours of my embossing powder. But this one, again, because of the size, I couldn't kind of dunk this into that embossing powder in the tub, so I did just tip it out. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of an idea, maybe a bit of inspiration if you do have some coloured embossing powders, just of a different way that you could use them, and just create something a little bit more kind of interesting. I do really love how all of these turned out. Like I said, quite a lot of embossing powder on this card today. So the one thing I just want to say really quickly is I have lost a little bit of footage when creating this card. I decided to have a go at filming this on my phone rather than on my big digital camera, and I accidentally filmed it in 4K, so hopefully this is going to be sort of super crisp. I don't think a crafting video needs to be in 4K, but just to let you know that, like I said, I am missing a little bit of kind of footage there when kind of bringing the card together, but I'm hoping it's not going to sort of affect it sort of too much. But now I've got all of my elements together, so I did die cut as well a nested torn edge circle from some vellum. Again, I wanted to create a layer between my background and my typewriter, so I've got that just off to the side, and I'm just trimming down. I don't want to take too much off this. I'm just trying to trim down all the kind of nubby bits that I've got stuck on the edge of my background, because I did cut this panel to kind of the exact size, but now I can start kind of bringing this together. So originally I was planning to do a landscape card. Obviously this panel is much smaller, so I've still got a nice decent sort of edge then to my card, but I felt like it was really kind of squished, so I decided to do it landscape instead. So I have my piece of vellum. I'm going to then put my typewriter over the top of this, and then we're going to add some twine, and then we're just going to add in our heat embossed floral pieces as well. So what I'm going to do is just sort of talk you through, because this is where I'm missing a bit of footage where I actually put this together. So I added quite a lot of these small foam squares to help support my typewriter. I'm going to attach this then to my vellum circle. So obviously with the vellum, you're going to be able to kind of see through part of it. So I wanted to make sure that that didn't happen. So that's why I'm adding my foam squares to my typewriter. So my typewriter be propped up like I want it to be, but then my vellum is going to be kind of flat against that background. So my background has all of that texture paste and embossing powder, so you want to make sure that you adhere it really, really well. So using something strong to make sure it sticks to that background. Then I'm also going to use some of the lawn fawn twine. So I think this is the lemonade twine. This came with my lawn fawn bundle for winning the card maker of the year, so I've still got that to show you. This was like a little bit of the footage that I had lost, so you can see here our card is together. So all I did was use that twine, wrapped it around and sort of slightly behind our typewriter, and I just tied a neat bow. I actually much prefer using twine than kind of ribbons and things. It makes it so much easier for creating bows and things. That's my personal preference. And all I've done then is taken our heat embossed little floral die cuts, and I'm just having these kind of coming out either side. So some of them I've stuck onto that paper, but I've just sort of tucked it so it looks like it's coming out from our typewriter. I've used some of that lawn fawn liquid glue as well. Any places where I felt like it wasn't sticking, I've just used my reverse tweezers, and you can see that on the right hand side I'm just kind of holding that in place just to make sure that's sitting exactly where I want it to sit. So again, I'm just kind of arranging these. I don't want it to cover kind of our sentiment or our paper. I just want it to kind of accent it really beautifully. But I actually created 2 of these cards, so this is actually my second attempt at filming this video. Like I said, I've had a lot of issues. The first one really wasn't that different, but I much prefer how this one has come out. Again, the way that everything has heat embossed, I think it's so beautiful. Yes, I really love this die set. Some of the last die sets that have come out have just been fabulous. I've really enjoyed creating projects with it, and like the magazine shows you, you can use this for masculine cards, feminine cards, and you could use it on loads of different kinds of projects. I just think it's brilliant. So now I've got everything set exactly where I want it to be. Everything is dry. I added some Big Mama foam tape to the back of my panel, and I've just popped that onto some pistachio green cardstock. You can see I've got a really nice kind of big border here. I really wanted to have that big border, and I'm gonna actually be adding this to the card so then there isn't the white border from the actual card base itself. So normally I will cut it so I have sort of a small white border, but this is going to be full, just completely green. It's completely the same size. So that piece has been cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I really don't do this very often, but I don't know why, because I think it's really beautiful, kind of sometimes not having that white card base. It just makes all the difference, and like I said, I really love how this card has turned out. I'm going to finish this off with some Nouveau crystal drops. This is Wisteria Purple. I think in total I added 5, so I tried to make sure I went with an uneven number. I'm sort of somewhat happy with the placement. Again, it's just kind of that practicing to make sure, you know, you sort of put them in the right place where it's kind of pleasing to the eye. I did some on the background, some on the typewriter, the paper, so just kind of mixing it up a little bit. And then there is our finished card today. So again, I can only apologise, I've lost a little bit of footage in there, but hopefully everything you've kind of followed, and I'm hoping this is going to give you some inspiration, or maybe using your embossing powders again, just in a slightly different way. So just to remind you, this was using Die Cut Essentials issue 79. If you did like this video, please give it a thumbs up and leave me a comment down below. If you haven't subscribed to my channel already, please do so you don't miss out on any future videos. So that's it for today. Thanks very much for watching, and happy crafting.